August 15, 1947. Imagine standing in the sweltering heat of Delhi as the Union Jack descends for the final time. The world's most powerful empire, the British Colossus that once dominated a quarter of the planet, is leaving, not with fanfare, not with pride, but with something far more revealing: bankruptcy. Here's what they don't teach you in school. India didn't gain independence because Britain suddenly developed a conscience. Britain couldn't afford to stay. World War II had drained the nation's treasury to empty vaults. National debt had exploded to over 200% of GDP, a financial catastrophe so severe that it would take Britain 60 years just to repay American loans. The empire wasn't defeated in battle, it was murdered by mathematics. And when India slipped away, the entire imperial machine began to collapse like a house of cards. Let's rewind to December 31st, 1600. Queen Elizabeth I signs a royal charter. It seems like a minor bureaucratic document, just some English merchants getting permission to trade east of Africa. The charter creates something called the East India Company. Nobody at that moment realizes they're launching the most devastating corporation in human history. For decades, it looks harmless. Spices, textiles, tea, exotic goods from faraway lands, but something sinister begins to unfold. This company doesn't just trade, it conquers, it rules. It becomes a nation-state unto itself, a corporation with more power than most kingdoms. By the 1700s, the East India Company commands 260,000 soldiers. That's twice the size of Britain's entire military. Imagine this: a private company, not a government, not a nation, but a corporation fielding an army larger than any standing military in Europe. They mint their own currency. They negotiate treaties, they execute people, they wage wars. The company has become an empire within an empire. The turning point arrives in 1757 at Plassey. After defeating the Nawab of Bengal, the East India Company receives the Diwani, the right to collect taxes across Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This single document hands control of 30 million people to a corporation. 30 million, not to a king, not to a nation. To shareholders seeking profit. What happens next isn't incompetence, it's calculated extraction. The company monopolizes everything: salt, tobacco, opium. Indian artisans who had mastered their crafts for generations are suddenly forced to sell their goods at prices 40% below market value. The legendary weavers of Bengal, whose fabrics were famous across the world, are reduced to bonded laborers. Their choice becomes simple: work for starvation wages or starve. But there's worse. In 1769 and 1770, the Bengal famine kills between 7 and 10 million people. 10 million. That's approximately the current population of New York City, dead. The company's response? Silence. They don't provide relief. They don't reduce taxes, they maintain collections. They literally tax people to death. This isn't a policy failure, this is policy. Here's a number that should haunt you. In 1750, India produced 27% of the world's industrial output. By 1900, that number had collapsed to just 2%. What happened? Britain didn't just conquer India. It systematically destroyed Indian industry. Picture this. Indian markets are flooded with cheap British-manufactured goods. These products enter tariff-free. Meanwhile, Indian producers face crushing taxes. British factories buy India's raw cotton for pennies, spin it into textiles in Manchester, and sell those same products back to Indian consumers at massive markups. The profit is guaranteed. Competition is destroyed. The numbers tell the story. Between 1850 and 1896, textile imports from Britain soar from 5 million to 18 million units. India's legendary weavers' families, whose ancestors had perfected their craft over centuries, are wiped out. Entire communities collapse. In less than 300 years, India's GDP per capita falls from 60% of Britain's to just 15%. This wasn't accidental. This was design. When the textile extraction begins to slow, Britain discovers a new revenue source: addiction. The East India Company becomes the world's largest drug trafficking operation. They force Indian farmers to abandon food crops and grow opium instead. This opium is transported to China, where it's traded for silver and tea. China, watching its population fall into addiction, resists. Britain's response is to declare war not once, but twice. The opium trade becomes Britain's second-largest source of government revenue, surpassed only by land taxes. An entire nation's treasury is built on addiction and extraction. History books celebrate the railways. Britain's greatest gift to India, they say. The truth is darker. Between 1860 and 1890, India's rail network explodes from 1,130 kilometers to 25,000 kilometers. This sounds impressive. It is impressive. There's one problem. India doesn't own it. India is forced to borrow the money at interest to pay for construction. The contracts mandate that all equipment be purchased from Britain. So the chain works like this. India borrows money, India pays for construction, British companies supply the materials, Britain pockets the profits. The railways exist not to help Indians but to move British troops and extract more resources faster. An Indian economist named Dadabhai Naoroji calculates the numbers in the 1870s. Britain extracts between $30 and $40 million from India annually. The 20th century brings new horrors. During World War I, India sacrifices over 1 million soldiers across every major front: Gallipoli, France, Mesopotamia. Over 150,000 are killed or wounded. But the blood isn't enough. India also ships millions of tons of wheat, cotton, timber, and supplies. As a final indignity, India gives Britain £100 million a fortune to finance the war. India even has to pay for much of its own war effort. World War II is catastrophic. The British Indian Army swells to 3.35 million men, the largest volunteer force in human history. To finance this, Britain issues currency called sterling balances, essentially promises to pay massive debts. By 1945, India has become Britain's biggest creditor. India has paid and paid and paid, keeping the empire's war machine running. Then comes 1943, the Bengal famine. Between 800,000 and 3.8 million people starve while India is forced to export food to feed Europe. British leadership watches with cold indifference. Winston Churchill suggests that Indians should look after themselves. He even considers using the famine as leverage to erase India's debts. Imperial arrogance reaches its apex. By 1945, the British Empire is broken. Its debt is twice the size of its economy. Exports have crashed. Factories are idle. The machinery of global dominance, once fueled by colonial wealth, has ground to a halt. The U.S. steps in with a $3.75 billion loan. Canada adds another $1.9 billion. These loans keep Britain alive, but the empire itself is finished. Britain won't finish repaying these loans until 2006, 60 years later. On June 3, 1947, Britain announces its withdrawal from India. By August 15, the flag comes down. It isn't a gesture of grace or enlightenment. It's a retreat of desperation. It's a confession that the money has run out. In 1700, India's share of global GDP, 27%. By 1947, 4%. In the same period, Britain's share rises from 2.9% to 9%. For 200 years, Britain's rise mirrors India's decline. When the extraction stops, the empire stops too. After independence, India begins to rebuild. In 1947, average life expectancy is 27 years. By 2000, it has more than doubled. In just decades of self-rule, India achieves what 190 years of British development never did. But here's the warning buried in this history. Empires don't fall in a day. They bleed out slowly through arrogance, overspending, and the dangerous illusion that power is permanent. Today, the United States stands where Britain once stood. A global superpower with 750 military bases across every continent, trillions in accumulated debt, and a financial system stretched to its limits. Britain's power was built on colonial extraction. America's depends on the dollar's supremacy, global trade access, and military presence enforcing it. But when debt piles up and the costs of empire exceed the returns, decline begins. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The British Empire's trillion-dollar mistake wasn't just financial, it was moral. It was believing you could drain the world forever without consequence. When the bill finally came due, the sun that once never set on the British Empire set forever.